So I believe that was a pretty okay kind of an overview on NetBeans. So let's see what NetBeans in itself looks like. So for those who have just heard about NetBeans and haven't worked on it, so this is how NetBeans ID looks like. I've tried to increase the font size so that the code can be a bit legible, but if I increase much more than that, I don't think I'll be able to write it. Okay. So you have a standard IDE here with your, okay, so you have your standard ID with your menu bars. You have different menus. Then you have your toolbars, you have your projects pane. So whenever you work on a project, you open it as a project file in NetBeans and start writing your code in it. You have a file system browser using which you can navigate through your file system. So again, you don't have to do an Alt tab to go to your Windows Explorer or any other browser. Now this is probably the main pane in NetBeans here. Right? So it lists out the various services that are registered. So you have a node for database. So you can open connections to various databases here. Right? So let's say you're using MySQL or you're using Derby. So pretty much any database that you use, enterprise level database, has a TCP/IP socket. Right? And we open connection to that database by providing what? A URL in JDBC, login name, and the driver. Right? Login name, password, and the driver. So that's exactly you can connect to database. So let me connect to a database here called sample. So I right click on the connection, which is nothing but a JDBC node, and it tries to connect. And once the connection is maintained, the icon changes. You can expand the node here, and it lists out the various tables, views, and procedures in your database. So when I click on tables, it shows what are the various tables that exist in my database. So for example, if I want to see the details of customer table, I right click, I say view data. Okay. So I didn't have to write a single line of query, and I was able to search and access my database for records from within my IDE itself. Okay. And suppose you want to see the details of some other table, you can just, it has an auto-completion feature that lists out the various tables, which is really handy. And you can see the details, right? So where this helps the most, for example, I use Linux. The Linux, Solaris, if you're using any of the Unix flavor operating systems, and we try to do a query to the database, we do it from the shell. Okay? When not everyone has an enterprise, proprietary database solution installed. And when you use the shell, you don't get these kind of auto-completion things for tables. Right? So you can use it from within NetBeans instead of doing Alt, Tab, and going through Windows. Okay? So that was the database part of it. Right? And then we have another node called Web Services that lists out the various open web services that you can access from your application. Right? And we have another interesting node here called Servers. Now, I mentioned about different type of applications, desktop, web, mobile. Okay? Now, when you run a desktop application, the entire runtime, the entire services are built into your application itself. So you just double click and it gets invoked. Right? That's why we call it a fat client application. Right? Because most of your logic, most of your code lies in that one big bundle. Okay? But when we develop a web application, we get a thin client because the way we access the application is just through the browser. Okay? Now in your browser, you don't have the business logic, you don't have the application code. Right? That's why it's called a thin client. So where does the logic and application code reside? It resides on the servers. It could be web server, if you're just using web-based services. It could be an application server, if your application itself has your application logic and accesses various other business-related services or messaging-related services from another server. Right? So in that case, we need to deploy our web application onto a server and then access it through a browser, right? So people here who are actually working professionals, so they may feel that, well, it's too basic stuff. But I must say these things because we have a lot of students here and I don't want them to feel left out, right? So do bear with me, okay? And so how do we work with all these different servers, right? So 5 years back, if you had to develop a web application or an enterprise application, right, it used to be really painful. Why? Because you must select which application server you want to use to develop your application. Because each application server had its own pretty complicated way of dealing with things. Each had its own way of deploying an application. Each had its own way of configuring things. Right? Now, with NetBeans, what we get is we can easily add an application server onto this node. How? Just right-click and say Add Server. And it shows you a list of various Java Enterprise Edition servers that you can connect NetBeans with. So these are probably the main ones that in any case people use. So we have WebLogic, we have Glassfish, we have WebSphere, we have JBoss, Tomcat. These are the popular ones. So you can configure your application server here. By doing so, you don't have to actually go to a shell and start application server or stop application server. You manage the server from within NetBeans itself. And when it comes to deploying applications onto the server, you don't have to again learn how to use a particular application server in itself. You can simply open a project in NetBeans, right-click and say deploy. Right? We will see in a moment. Okay? Can you just close this door so that people don't get distracted? Thank you. Okay, so this was just a bit of a preview of what NetBeans ID can do and all. As the session goes ahead, you will see much more things. Okay? So, coming back to the session. So, in the first part, what we are going to do, we are going to see application development using Java SE. Right. Now, Java SE holds your core language, APIs, your runtime. Okay. So, and it's usually used for developing desktop applications. Okay. Now, there seems to be some session going on at Basel. What would be really interesting if we can really increase the volume and have a question and answer session. So you don't say that? Yeah, I know. Probably then they would know what we are experiencing right now. Anyway, it's not their fault. So, Java and desktop applications. Java has typically been considered an excellent language for developing server-side applications. Right? However, it has not enjoyed the same kind of popularity on the desktop. People get afraid to develop desktop applications in Java. Desktop application means you have an icon, you double-click and you get a nice UI, a form. Okay? Why? Because of a bunch of reasons. We have issues with building GUI applications in Java. One, complexity with Swing APIs. How many people here have worked using Swing APIs? Yes. And of those who raised their hands, how many people love working on Swing? Excellent.